All right, and now joining us, we have a coach who has 744 career wins, 1611 all-time in the NCAA tournament, two-time Final Four participant, a MAC regular season champion, a CAA regular season champion, a CAA tournament winner, two-time ACC regular season tournament winner, and an ACC tournament winner, as well as winning many Coach of the Year honors, including a Naismith College Coach of the Year award in 2013. Coach Jim Larrañaga, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure, fellas.
I hope you don't get a little bashful with me reading all your accolades. I know some people don't like it, some people do. We had Rich Russo on, director of Fox, not too long ago, and we were going through what to read, and he's like 13-time Emmy Award winner's fine. So I was like, okay, we'll just read off the words. Um, but no, it's obviously this will be released on Friday. We're recording so day two of the tournament. This is being recorded just after Selection Sunday. Mind if I ask you quick takes on Selection Sunday? I mean, there's a lot of controversy surrounding who's in, who's not, and then seeding as well. Typical, right, amongst sports fans, but want to get your reaction if there's anything big that kind of crossed your mind after the events of last night.
Well, I think the biggest thing was how did the University of North Carolina get this 68th spot, the last at-large bid. And playing in the ACC, Carolina has played a very, very difficult schedule. Their non-conference schedule was very challenging. In the league, they played against a lot of good teams. The ACC has been getting, I'll say, ridiculed over the last several years. And yet, once those teams get to the NCAA tournament, they do very, very well. So I don't know how Carolina will do this year. They're in the play-in game. So, but there's controversies every time
Hmm.
because somebody gets left out that feels they're deserving. But there are some great early round matchups that I'm going to look forward to watching. The first one that came across was the Creighton matchup with Louisville, two teams that finished second in their respective leagues. Louisville in the ACC and Creighton in the Big East. That's those two great leagues. You finished second and you're seeded eighth and ninth, and you made it to the finals of your own tournament. So I think that's going to be a great first round matchup.
Yeah, so you mentioned it a little bit with you just actually mentioned it perfectly with those two teams, Creighton and Louisville, and how lowly they were seated. Everybody's making a big deal about the SEC. By the way, I didn't mention before. I think I mentioned on the phone before while we were sending this. I'm an ACC guy. Grew up a huge Duke fan. So I know you can't tell. I didn't want to offend you. I'd being a Miami guy, so I was like, let's keep off the Duke for today. Um, but SEC has 14 teams in, and everybody's making a big deal out of that. Everybody's saying SEC top 10 team every time they play each other. It's a top 10 a game. Like, is it fair in your mind that 14 teams, the 14th best team in a conference is getting in and a higher seed than some of these, like you said, the ACC getting an 8, a Big East getting a 9? Like, fair or not, I guess it's happening. But what's your take on that? Like 14 teams getting in from one conference.
They've had a great season as
Mm-hmm.
a league. And it's hard to argue with, how good they are when, Auburn, perhaps the best team in the country. You have Tennessee that's been in the top 10 all season long. You have the two Mississippi schools. You've got Kentucky and Arkansas. You've got so many really good teams. One of the matchups I'm looking forward to watching is when Mississippi State plays Baylor in the first round. Two of my former players, with the portal, with NIL, these
Mm-hmm.
two guys were lured away. Michael Nwako plays for Mississippi State, and Norshad Omir plays for Baylor. So now, instead of being teammates, they're going to battle each other in the first round of the NCAA tournament. It's what makes the March Madness so good is there is so much unpredictable things that can happen and do happen. I love watching it. I love following it. There's a lot of action, and it'll begin with the four teams that'll play on Tuesday night, then follow it on Wednesday. And then when we get to the round of 64, anybody can beat anybody.
Coach, you mentioned Auburn. I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit on the fact that they're the number one overall seed in spite of having lost three of their last four games. Does that reconcile with you, or do you think that they should have dropped from there?
I think the biggest thing is they had an awesome regular season. It ended on a sour note, losing 3 out of 4, losing in the tournament. But it's always been my thinking and theory that you reward teams for the body of work that they did. Because you can't determine where were those games played, how good were the other teams playing, were they tournament-worthy teams, and they were. So you got to say to yourself, okay, so they lost to a couple of good teams, but they also have like an incredible number of quad one wins. I think they're at 16 quad one wins.
Yeah, 16.
So, yeah, I think they earned a number one seed. Are they the number one team overall? Well, the committee thought so, but I would have chosen Duke because I think after the non-conference, they just rolled. And they beat Auburn in the regular season.
I actually love having another ACC guy on here because I don't have to speak so much for Duke. Thanks, Coach. I appreciate you backing up the Blue Devils on that one. That's and it's logical too. Duke beat Auburn. Auburn's number one. That's how I see it. But you mentioned earlier like games being tough earlier in tournament time, right? Upsets happen. Everything you've worn both hats. George Mason, you took George Mason to the Final Four. You've taken Miami to the Final Four. Both exciting runs. You've been the underdog. You've been the favorite. Does the mentality shift depending on where you see yourselves, or do you go in, or do you specifically, do you take every team in there like, no, dogs, favorites doesn't matter. We're going to go out there. We're going to win this game because we're going to play our brand of basketball, and that includes winning. So, like, I guess, what's your mentality, I guess, with the two different teams, underdog, favorite, major, mid-major?
Well, I coached at the mid-major level for 25 years. And the real challenge at the mid-major level is getting in the tournament. Because so many of those mid-major leagues are one-bid leagues. Like I watched VCU play George Mason, my old school, in the A10 championship. And I thought both of those teams were very, very worthy of an at-large bid. So VCU earned the automatic bid, and George Mason is now in the NIT. So they don't get a chance in the non-conference to schedule all these quad one games. Now you say, well, why not? Why don't they schedule a bunch of really good teams? Well, the other good teams will play them. When I was at George Mason, I called every head coach in the ACC and asked them to put us on their schedule. And they wouldn't do it. I said, we'll come to your place. It'll be a guarantee game. You don't have to return the game. And they said, no. And I said, why not? And they said, well, because we have nothing to win and everything to lose. And it's not that we weren't able to schedule some ACC teams once in a while. We played at Duke one year. We played at Carolina one year. We played at Maryland one year. And we played at Virginia one year. But you notice the four teams I mentioned, they were all like top 10 teams in the country at the time. So they didn't worry about playing at George Mason. So we went to the SEC and we played Mississippi and Mississippi State. We played one at home and one on the road. And then the next year, the team that we played on the road came to us. The team that had come to us, we went on the road and played them. And we split with them. Two good SEC programs. And we played each team twice, so we went 2-2. The thing about mid-majors, they're kind of in a bad place as far as quad one wins. Because the only place they can really get it is on a neutral site in a tournament in November. And, there's not going to be a lot of at-large bids going to those teams.
Yeah.
Nick, what was the other question you asked me?
Just what the mentality is of the reverse. Like
Oh yeah.
you're a major conference
So,
school.
well, the first thing I would say when we got an at-large bid at George Mason, we had already planned on getting to the Final Four. Did you hear me?
Yeah,
I did.
that's
That's awesome.
cool.
Okay, and here's how I will tell you that happened. One of my best friends in life is Dr. Bob Rotella, a sports psychologist. Anybody that plays golf will know he's written a dozen best-selling books on golf. So I called him before the season and I said, look, we got a great team. I think we're going to have a great year, but I needed my players to know how good I think we can be. So he came to George Mason on October 30th of 2005 before we played games. And he asked the players to put their head down on their desk and to dream about how good they thought we could be. And when he asked them to pick their head up and share a dream, Lamar Butler, one of our senior co-captains, said, I dreamt we made it to the Final Four.
Hmm.
And Rotella said to the players, how many of you think that's even possible? And they all raised their hand. And he said, well, then no longer are you college basketball fans. No longer do you watch a game thinking like, okay, that's Carolina, that's Duke, they're awesome, or Connecticut, they're great, or Michigan State, or Kentucky. You look at it like they're your opponents on your way to the Final Four. And how Coach L and the staff would prepare you for that. And can you beat them? And you got to visualize you beating them now in October. You don't wait till March to figure that out. And sure enough, our first round opponent in the NCAA was Michigan State. We beat them 75-65. We beat Carolina in the next round 65-62. And they were the defending national champions. Yeah. And then the next week we beat Wichita State. And then we beat Connecticut, who was the #1 seed and obviously one of the best basketball programs in the history of college basketball. So we went in with the mindset that we were as good as any of those teams. When we got to the Final Four, we felt the same way, but we ran into that Florida team that had the two best big men in the country in Joakim Noah and Al Horford. Mm-hmm. We just weren't big enough to contend with them, even though we beat Connecticut that had a front court of Rudy Gay, Josh Boone, and Hilton Armstrong, 6'9", 6'10", 6'11".
Yeah.
But those two big guys from Florida were just too good. At Miami, when we got into the tournament, one of our fears was who we were going to play in the first round because Norshad Omier was nursing a sprained ankle that he got in the ACC tournament. Very similar to what Cooper Flagg did this year. So Norshad worked so hard to get his ankle well, and we played Drake, and we trailed by 7 with 4 minutes to go, and things were not looking good. But we were able to gut it out, grind it out, and pull off the victory. And then we had to play Indiana, who was the 4 seed. We beat them by like 18. We played a great game. Then we played Houston, who was the #1 seed. We beat them. And again, Kelvin Sampson I think he was very surprised as to how good we were because the ACC was getting trashed all season long, like we didn't belong. And then we played the University of Texas, and we were down 13 on them with 10 minutes to go. And we rallied the troops and were able to forge ahead at the end and get to the Final Four. But I think so much of that team was they were so well connected on the court and off the court. And a lot of it, I would credit Isaiah Wong and Jordan Miller for being such great team leaders. I think they just demanded from their teammates that you elevate your game to our level. And a guy like Nigel Pack, he was MVP of the Midwest Regional. Norshad Omier was the leading rebounder in the NCAA tournament. And of course, Jordan Miller, he scored 27 points on 13 attempts. He made all 13 shots from the field and from the free throw line.
That's impressive.
Incredible.
Coach, you mentioned that Florida team that you ran into. We have a local person here, Danny Werner, who was on that team as well. And he was a young man that I coached against when he was in 7th grade. So it was kind of fun to watch him play on the big stage. But do you remember that name?
I don't remember that name. He must have come in off the bench.
Yeah.
But I do remember the venue. because when my players, you talk about, believing in yourself and confidence. When we went into the RCA Dome in Indianapolis and 40,000 people there to watch us practice, I could literally see my players gazing into the stands and looking around like, oh my God, what have we gotten ourselves into?
Yeah.
It was great, and they loved it. But I'm afraid, Darren, I don't know Mr. Werner.
Yeah, he was typically first off the bench. So the 6'9" guy kind of played the 3 spot.
Okay.
But curious, when you went into that big gym and the kids were awestruck by it, did you break into the Hoosier speech?
No, what's funny? Billy Donovan was the head coach back then, and Billy played high school basketball at St. Agnes of Rockville Center on Long Island. And in his senior year, he wasn't being as highly recruited as I thought he should be. And he had a scrimmage game against my alma mater, Archbishop Malloy High School in Queens.
Yeah.
And I was an assistant at Virginia at the time, and we were recruiting their point guard, Kenny Smith. And so Kenny the Jet Smith is an awesome player. He had narrowed it down to 2 schools, us and Carolina, and of course he ended up choosing Carolina. But on that day, I'm in the gym to watch Kenny, and I'm watching Billy Donovan play. And my alma mater calls me and says, hey, we hear that Billy Donovan's playing and you're there watching. How good is he? And I said, you guys should offer him right away. I think he'd be a great fit for the Friars. He ended up going to Providence. Then they got Rick Pitino, and they made it to the Final Four in, I think it was 87.
I believe you're right. And Coach, you just mentioned it a few times. You're a Queens native, right? Or a New York native, we'll say. And, Rick Pitino, who was at Providence, is now at St. John's. I know you probably don't have a rooting interest in anything, but does it, as a New York guy, does it make you a little happy, or to see like the pride of New York, the Johnnies make it into the tournament and win the Big East for the first time in 25 years? Or is that long past, and you're just like, no, all ACC all the way? So I would respect the latter too, if that's the case, because ACC. Baby.
Okay, well, there's a number of things. First of all, I'm from the Bronx.
Oh, okay.
I went to high school in Queens. It took me 90 minutes to leave my apartment building in the Bronx and arrive at Archbishop Malloy. I was recruited by St. John's. My brother, my older brother Bob, went to St. John's on a basketball scholarship and played for 2 legendary coaches, Joe Lapchick and Lou Conaseca. And so I was a big fan of St. John's growing up. My brother would take me to Madison Square Garden to watch the Johnnies play then. And so I love St. John's. I love Coach Conaseca. He recruited me when I was a senior in high school. I chose Providence because I did not want to stay in the city. But I've always kind of, from a distance now, when we didn't have to play them, I was a fan of St. John's because Lou Conaseca was the high school coach at Archbishop Malloy High School before he left to go to St. John's to be Joe Lapchick's assistant. And then my high school coach replaced Lou Conaseca. So there was very much a family connection. My brother played for Lou. Lou came from Malloy. I was recruited by St. John's. But as far as Rick Pitino is concerned, in this day and age, he's got so many people in New York. He doesn't need another fan. There's not enough room in Madison Square Garden to even put another fan. That Madison Square Garden was back to the good old days with Chris Mullen and Bill Wennington and Patrick Ewing and Eddie Pickney. Those were the days that the Big East. Now, of course, back then I was in the ACC, but I was a huge fan of the Big East for one reason. Not only did I play at Providence, but my college coach at Providence was Dave Gavitt. Dave Gavitt is the founding father of the Big East.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Dave Gavitt was first the head coach at Providence, then the athletic director at Providence, then the commissioner, the first commissioner of the Big East. He was the one that recruited St. John's, Villanova, Georgetown, Syracuse. He really created the Big East in the late 70s, early 80s. And he was the one, his vision, he was a visionary, his ability to see into the future, he was the one that helped ESPN get started because he committed the Big East to playing on Big Monday and Big Wednesday and whatever the names were back then, all those big games. And that helped all of those Big East schools recruit because, Syracuse with Jim Boeheim always been good. And back then, they recruited New York City mostly. But after the Big East got going, they were recruiting California, they were recruiting Washington, D.C., and Baltimore, and you could go anywhere in the country. They had Riney Cycli, who came from Greece. I mean, the whole Dave Gavitt vision of what the Big East could be was miraculous. He convinced Syracuse to not play in Manley Fieldhouse and go to the Carrier Dome. He convinced Georgetown not to play in McDonough and go to the Cap Center. He convinced St. John's to move to Madison Square Garden. Those, Connecticut, going to the Hartford Civic Center. Providence had the Dunk, the Dunkin' Donuts Arena. So everything became much more big time. Television escalated that league to put it on par with the ACC, who had dominated college basketball for the first 40 years. Dean Smith and Vic Bubas and Norm Sloan and Jimmy Valvano and Bobby Cremins, all those guys. And then Coach K comes along and starts dominating college basketball like nobody else, except John Wooden. But no one paid attention to the West Coast. Back then, the Pac-8 was, that's UCLA and nobody else. Not until we got multiple teams in. But you still see, if you project this year's Final Four, how many West Coast teams are projected to make it?
Not many.
None.
I think zero.
Zero.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to the old stat. Kid. Go ahead. Sorry, Big D, you were saying?
I was just going to say, I'm a California kid growing up, and before I came out east for the Naval Academy, that was one of the things that always, got under my skin a little bit. It was the Big East was put back then, to Nick's point earlier, was always putting 7 or 8 teams in, and there were barely any West Coast teams.
Well, I think there's an old stat too that teams since UCLA's last win, maybe there hasn't been a team west of Texas to win or even participate in the final. Well, not participate, but win the national champion since then. Since the early 70s or something like that. Yeah, it goes back a long time for a West Coast team west of Texas to go back and win it all. So that is crazy.
Zaga, I think, was the program that perennially, made a splash.
Mm-hmm.
They'd win some games. They'd be projected to win it all. They'd get to the Final Four. But, the game of basketball right now at the college level is being dominated by the East, the South, and the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
From Chicago down through Texas and everybody to the east of those states. So, and I love the ACC. To me, it was when I was growing up, I was a huge fan of North Carolina and Coach Dean Smith. And the theory was if you were good enough to play college basketball coming out of New York, the Tar Heels would recruit you. And they recruited some of my teammates. They did not recruit me, but they recruited some of my high school teammates. And then when I had a battle to try to get Kenny Smith, Dean Smith had not seen him play and they hadn't offered him. We tried to sign him in the early signing period. And Dean Smith called the day before he was going to sign with us and asked him to just wait, that he hadn't seen him play, he wants to see him play. And then he went to see him in an early season game, and Kenny Smith scored 47. That did it. Dean Smith offered him right after the game, and that changed everything.
That'll certainly do. Real quick break from basketball talk. You said you're a Bronx guy. Are you a baseball fan at all?
Baseball?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up a Yankees fan
Okay.
during the Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris era. I knew every Yankee, followed it closely, played a lot of stickball in the park. But once I moved away from New York, I quit following. Actually, I quit following sports other than
Mm.
basketball.
Hmm.
I was not a big football fan or baseball fan or hockey fan. I just devoted all my time because my dream was to be a college coach.
Okay.
When I was a freshman in high school, we had a terrific freshman team, and we were 7-0 at Christmas time. Went home for Christmas break, came back after the new year, and when I walked into the locker room for the first time, my high school coach, Jack Curran, who's a Hall of Famer, he called me into the office. He always called me Larry. He said, Larry, brother Edmund quit the Marist order, so there's no freshman coach. So I want you to coach the freshman team. And I said, well, Mr. Curran, you know I'm only 14 years old. So he said, yeah, that's all right, but you'll do a great job. And sure enough, my freshman team went undefeated, won the New York City championship, and I dreamed about being a college coach every day after that.
That's
So that's where
awesome.
you got the bug, and obviously you fulfilled your dream because you were a phenomenal coach on a lot of different in a lot of different programs. I had a coaching question for you. I always remember your teams, both at George Mason and Miami in particular, being a swarming, long, tough defensive team. And I guess I think the name that they applied to your program was scramble defense. Who I know Mike Coach Yashevsky was always man. Coach Boeheim was always 2-3. Huggy Bear was always at 1-1-3. And which kind of defense gave you fits, like to prepare for that?
Well, actually, throughout my coaching career, and this started with high school, my high school coach, we pressed for 32 minutes of every high school game of my high school career. It was relentless pressure.
Yeah.
When I became an assistant coach at Davidson and then at Virginia under Terry Holland, he was strictly a man-to-man coach and more like the Tony Bennett pack line defense. When I became a head coach, I was looking for something that would separate us from our opponents. So we kind of stole some ideas from my high school coach, from North Carolina and Dean Smith, and from Rick Pitino, those teams, and we decided we'd scramble. And that basically meant trap the ball, right?
Mhm.
Whether it be a wing entry, an inbounds pass, trap the dribbler as he crossed midcourt. And our goal was to force turnovers. And I don't know if there's ever been a head coach at any school since John Wooden in 1965 to take two different programs to the Final Four where the tallest guy on the team in the rotation was 6'7". So our George Mason team was 6 feet, 6'2", 6'4", 6'5" and a half, 6'7". That was the starting lineup. At Miami, our team was 6 foot, 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", 6'5" and a half.
Wow.
No, we listed Norshad Mir at 6'5" and a half. I'm sorry, we listed him at 6'7", but he was really 6'5" and a half, 245 pounds. And he said, it sounded better if I'm 6'7". I said, oh, okay. But can you imagine getting to the Final Four with that little size?
That's
Now,
crazy.
playing against the teams we did that had just so much more size than we did. But our defense, it's one of the reasons I'm not coaching anymore. I couldn't get my teams to buy into defense these
Mm.
last two seasons. And if you don't defend, you're not going to win, especially you're not going to win in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. Have part of that, I guess, recruiting and having people buy into defense anymore. I think you can kind of attribute to NIL and the fact that it's almost like and I don't know if this is the case, but I can see people being a player agent at one point. I can definitely see players being like, well, I'm not getting paid for defense. I'm getting paid for what I did on offense. I don't know if that's true or not, but like, do you get the sense that NIL has had that impact? Like, I'm getting paid, coach. Like, I'm going to be here for a year and then transfer out and get paid somewhere else. Like, how much of an impact do you think that has on recruiting, and how hard do you think that is putting together a winning team to make it as far as both your teams did, which is Final Four and ultimately a national championship?
Well, I certainly think the teams that are going to make it to the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, the Final Four, and whoever's going to win the national championship has figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I was not able to figure it out. And I think our players in general were looking at dollar signs.
Mm.
It was no longer about winning, but how much money are you going to pay me?
Mm-hmm.
And with the advent of the portal, guys, they were thinking about transferring and putting their name in the portal in January before conference play even began. I had high school coaches call me and say, look, at my player at such and such a school is playing really well. Would you be interested in him? And I was like, wait a minute. Those calls came in December. And I'm like, and he's already thinking about transferring when he's having a great year. So the culture has changed, the environment has changed, and I think the money in combination with the portal has college basketball has suffered because of those two new rules.
Do you think the
Yeah, I
other
would agree
sports
with
are
that
playing?
100%.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Big Dave. What were you saying?
No, I just said I would agree with that 100%. And unfortunately, in our area, coach, and others, you're seeing it trickle down in the high school, not so much for money, but just where they think they can get the limelight or the best
Yeah.
path to whatever their hopes and dreams are.
And what were you going to say, Nick?
So I was going to say, I actually forget what I was going to say now, but I do have another question, and then there's another segment if you don't mind. I know we're crunching up on time here. The one question I have for you before we get to our last segment is you mentioned a few times ACC. I'm bringing it back to the tournament. ACC has been almost mistreated as being one of the staples of college basketball for years. Over the last few years, it's been mistreated. But then you look back at the last 5 years, I don't think there has been a Final Four without a singular ACC team, if not more. Going back to last year's NC State team, your 2023 Miami team, and so on and so forth. Do you think, and they outperform their supposed like stature every year? Do you think that we will see that same trend keep on going for the ACC?
Okay, I'm going to answer the question this way.
Okay.
There has been a couple of leagues that have really devoted a lot of money to NIL.
Mm-hmm.
And this is only what I've heard. So these are not facts. The problem with NIL is there's no transparency. You don't really know what guys are getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know when I would call to recruit a young man, he'd send me to his agent, and the agent would say to me, nah, this is a good player. If you want to be involved, it's $1 million. And I was like, what? $1 million? No, there's no way I'm going to offer $1 million to a kid.
Yeah.
But other schools, he said, were doing that.
Mm.
So it's not just other schools, but it's an entire league, the SEC, the Big 12. I'm not sure about the Big 10. I know the Big East is investing a lot more money now. I think until the ACC, which now has expanded to 18 teams, it's the largest league in the country, and yet the finances, I know this from talking to fellow head coaches, only a few schools have really raised their commitment financially to compete with the best teams in the country. And with that being said, it's professional sports.
Yeah.
So if you look at the NBA, the best players make the most money. The Steph Currys, LeBron James, the Kevin Durant's, all those guys are getting paid a huge amount of money. College basketball guys, one of our former players, it's my understanding, got paid $1.5 million. So if that money is out there, right? If I'm a young man and my parents are advising me and they're saying, well, it's college basketball wherever you go.
Mm-hmm.
If you can make $200,000 in one school and $1 million at a different school, why not go to the school that'll pay you $1 million? because just the theory, if you're looking at it objectively, the school that's making a $200,000 commitment is not as committed as the school that's making $1 million commitment. And if they're making that to me, how much are they paying my teammates? Because it's not likely that they're going to be paying, $20,000 to a guy. If somebody's making $1 million, there's probably at least a half a dozen or more making that kind of money to put your good players together to have a great team.
Yeah. So Big D, you have one last question before we get to the segment, or are you good?
No, go to the segment.
All right, actually, I do have one last one, and it's a quick one. Are you willing to give a prediction on who you think is going to win the national champion this year, or do you want to stay away from that?
No, who's going to win the national championship?
Who do you think is going to win the tournament this year?
Yeah, one of these teams, I think.
I'm ready for it.
I think Duke has a great shot. I think Florida has a great shot. I think Auburn has a great shot. And I think Houston has a great shot. Those four. Now, I haven't looked at the bracket well enough. Are they all four the number one seeds?
They are, Coach. Yeah.
So we chalk, Coach.
Don't worry. We won't make a meme out of that. You're good.
But the point is, the reasons they're the number one seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They've proven over the test of time. I look at the regular season as being a marathon. I look at the tournament as being a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
You win your sprint, you move on to the next round. You lose your sprint, you're out.
Yeah, I like that.
Nick,
that.
You said one more thing.
One last segment at outside the coach's box. We like to put in coaches back inside the box. We're going to give you a scenario and kind of ask what you would do. So here it is. 7 seconds left in the game. You just call a timeout, set up a play. Your player gets fouled, goes to the line, makes 2 free throws to put you up by 1. In that timeout, assuming that you're going to take the lead in that possession, like I just said you did, what are you telling your team off of taking the lead to do, not to do, whatever, in order to give up the lead that you just got?
Well, some of it has to do with the personnel you have. Some of it has to do with what transpired before that moment. So if we just took the lead, was it for the first time? Had this been a close game going back and forth?
Back and forth, you came back, you took the lead, yeah. That's kind of give me a real life situation. Okay,
so and you're saying there's 7 seconds left?
You got fouled at 7 seconds left. There's about 5.4 seconds left after the second made free throw.
Okay, so my message to the team is we've been here before.
Mm-hmm.
We know exactly what we have to do. Mm-hmm. And it's really 3 things. Number 1, we got to play the best defense we have played this game for this one possession. Second, we got to be sure we don't foul them and put them on the line. So defend without fouling. And lastly, get the darn rebound. Because in these situations, oftentimes it may not be a great first shot, but they're crashing the offensive boards because their life depends on it. Get on the glass. All 5 guys have to rebound. And when you get the rebound, hug it because they're in a fouling situation.
Yeah.
So how mad are you if your team gives up a coast-to-coast layup? Just, ask. This was a real-life situation. Michigan went coast-to-coast on Maryland after making 2 free throws and for the Big Ten semifinals. That's where this situation comes from. Big D and I were both watching it. Like, how do you give up a coast-to-coast easy layup for the win? Like, that was just
we did
crazy.
That when I was at Bowling Green. We did that at Ball State one year.
Mm-hmm.
They came up and pressed us. There was 5 seconds left, 4.8 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they came up and so we wouldn't roll the ball and pressuring. So we broke our 2 guards to the ball,
mm-hmm.
and they denied the heck out of them, which we knew they would do. And we threw it to our small forward, and at the timeout, We had told him, his name is Tommy Hall, 6'5", 6'6", fast as can be, cannot make a free throw. He was not a good free throw shooter. I said, Tommy, don't worry about it. They're not going to foul you. They're only up one.
Mm-hmm.
We inbounded the ball to him, and he drove by their whole team and dunked the ball to win at the buzzer.
Brilliant.
That's crazy. History repeats itself. Well, Coach, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for coming on. If you enjoyed it, we'd love to have you come back on, maybe after the tournament or something. But as of it stands right now, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure, Nick and Darren. Nice talking with you guys. Good luck.
Thank you, Coach.